Many Americans are familiar with the story. On November 4th, 1979, a group of Iranian youth stormed the American embassy in Tehran, took 52 American citizens hostage, and held them in captivity for 444 days. The U.S. was outraged. Although most people know this story, few know the backstory. In the early 1900s, oil deposits were discovered in Iran. Soon, large corporations set up oil refineries all over the area. Not long after, oil became Iran's primary export, and it remains that way today. The British government realized the immense profitability of this industry. Because of this, they purchased an oil company. At the time, it was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or AIOC. Now it is known as BP. Most of the profits from oil went to the British government, which, while providing them a booming economy, it left Iran in economic turmoil. The Abadan oil refinery, one of the largest in Iran, was completely under British control. This alienated many of the Iranian workers because their jobs solely benefited people halfway around the world. From these feelings, a political party was formed in Iran called the National Front Political Party, a leftist nationalist group dedicated to the nationalization of the AIOC. Out of this movement rose a new political figure, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh quickly gained favor and popularity in Iran by preaching his nationalistic and anti-imperialistic views by giving powerful and passionate speeches. In the late 1940s, the British began discussions with Mossadegh in an attempt to compromise on the nationalization of Iranian oil. While the talks were commencing, the Secret Intelligence Service, the British intelligence agency at the time, began talking to U.S. President Harry Truman's administration on a potential solution to overthrow Iran's government. The Truman administration continuously refused to get involved on the grounds that they felt what the British were planning to do was immoral. Eventually, growing support for Mossadegh led him to get elected as Prime Minister of Iran by a majority of 79 to 12 in the Majlis, the Iranian parliament. With his voice now in politics, his influence on the country was on display to the rest of the world. In 1951, with Mossadegh's leadership, the Majlis unanimously voted to nationalize the AIOC. The British, who were determined to regain control of the Iranian oil supply, imposed crushing embargoes and trade restrictions in Iranian oil. Iran's economy was inflated and decimated. As a result, the cost of oil in Britain rose, and the government was desperate to get back their control of Iranian oil. A retired five-star general from World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was elected as the 34th President of the United States of America in 1952. The British immediately attempted to get his administration's support on an Iranian coup to remove Mossadegh from power. Just as President Truman was before him, Eisenhower was very skeptical of the prospect of a coup. For Britain, a new way of garnering support from America was needed. Eisenhower, like many American politicians at the time, was very concerned with a possible communist takeover of the Middle East. The rising leftist Tudeh party in Iran was on America's watch list. This was the excuse the British needed to give the U.S. to ensure their involvement. Eisenhower signed off on the idea of a military coup in Iran early in 1953.
The Truman administration holds the line on actually executing a coup, although they do authorize some covert action before 53. And the Eisenhower administration requires some persuading to it.
The man put in charge of the operation was Kermit Roosevelt Jr. He was a senior officer in the Central Intelligence Agency's Middle Eastern Division. Before the coup could be carried out, preparations had to be made. Roosevelt, Allen Dulles, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency at the time, and John Dulles, the Secretary of State during the Eisenhower administration, all set up a vast network of informants, spies, and double agents in Iran. Three of their most important operatives were the Rashidian brothers, who were responsible for the bribing of officials, reporters, journalists, members of the Majlis, and even religious leaders. The CIA's propaganda artists worked tirelessly to paint the National Front Party as harmful to the Iranian people. To do this, the CIA organized bombings, the kidnapping of reporters who opposed the front, and in one case, paid for a kidnapping of a high-ranking general. They portrayed these events as organized by the National Front Party. Once the kidnapping became known, this event further threw Iran into chaos. Meanwhile, Mossadegh refused to censor any information about these events. He fully believed in the freedom of the people and press. All of these plans were second in importance to the negotiations going on with the ceremonial Shah. Mohammad Reza Shah was an apprehensive monarch and was not keen on using power. The CIA spent months trying to get him to agree to their plan for a coup. This plan called for an official decree from the Shah declaring Mossadegh's government to be null while appointing General Fazlollah Zahidi as the new prime minister. The official plan of the coup was drafted as Operation Ajax. This was a very detailed outline on how the CIA would achieve its goal. The official CIA report was written by Donald Wilber, a professor of Middle Eastern Studies turned CIA operative. After months of planning, on August 14th, the command was given by Washington for Operation Ajax to go into action. The following morning, at around 7 a.m., the official decrees from the Shah were read all over Iranian radio and printed in the newspapers. Iran went into chaos. Only a select few knew what was really happening, and rumors swirled. Around 11 p.m. the next day, the Iranian radio announced that the attempted coup had failed. Kermit Roosevelt was devastated. Despite orders to return to Washington, he stayed in Iran, determined to harness the momentum he had gained to deliver a successful coup. Over the next few days, he used his operatives to stage protests against Mossadegh. Then, on August 19th, the decrees from the Shah were once again issued and Mossadegh's house was surrounded. Fazlollah Zahidi was declared as the new prime minister and Mossadegh's government was declared null. Mossadegh was captured and he was sentenced to 3 years of prison and the rest of his life on house arrest. The full effects of Operation Ajax could not be seen until years later. The most immediate effect was the Shah's focus on power. He was no longer the apprehensive ruler he was before the coup and never hesitated to imprison journalists or dissidents, or even kill the people who opposed him and posed a threat to his regime. He served American and British interests by supplying them with oil. In addition, the Shah started the White Revolution, which was an attempt to gain the support of Iran's peasants and hopefully silence the increasingly frustrated middle class. It also outlawed unions and political parties and uprooted the theological education system in a country that had a huge Muslim majority. Also, the land reforms that were imposed helped create political loose cannons due to an increase in independent farming. To further worsen the Shah's position, the revolution doubled the sizes of the working class and academics, the two groups that hated him the most. As a result of all these factors, a revolution was inevitable. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Muslim cleric who was deported by the Shah, came back to Iran to help incite revolution. He promoted anti-West radical Islamic ideals and encouraged terrorist actions against the West. Eventually, this led up to the 1979 hostage crisis and Iranian Revolution.
In other words, 79 and the U.S.'s sort of association with being on the wrong side of that from the Iranian perspective is because the U.S. is on the wrong side of the 1953 situation.
Before 1953, the United States had made several attempts, some successful, to overthrow foreign governments. These include Hawaii in 1893 and Syria in 1949. Despite these events, Operation Ajax may be the single most important coup in American history. It created the idea that the overthrow of a government could be a plausible option to deal with future conflicts, which led to the U.S. staging many coups throughout the Cold War. Every single overthrow of a government performed by the United States from that point on was modeled after Ajax.
And so that becomes a part of U.S. Cold War policy in the 50s that creates what has been called blowback.
Blowback is defined as the unintended reaction caused by a military action. No operation in history caused more blowback than Operation Ajax. From the events that took place in 1953, anti-American sentiment was exponentially increased in the Middle East, which has, in a way, directly led to the many terrorist attacks such as 9/11. Many Middle Eastern nations have now become fearful of the U.S., including Iran, and their current position in international politics can be attributed to American involvement in their domestic issues. For Americans, securing our short-term interests may seem like a good idea, but when we do not consider the consequences, it is only inevitable that we will meet major resistance.